The neon-lit halls of Baron Theus's citadel cast an eerie purple glow across Jackson Reed's battle-scarred armor as he stood before the alien nobleman. His patience was wearing thin, the weight of the situation pressing down on him with each passing second. The Baron's emerald skin shimmered with barely contained amusement as he lounged on his crystalline throne, surrounded by armed guards whose trigger fingers twitched with anticipation. The air between them was thick, charged with tension. "My dear human," the Baron said with a laugh that sounded like shards of breaking glass, "surely you understand that times are difficult. Credits are hard to come by these days." Jackson clenched his jaw, muscles tightening in his stubbled face. He had done the work. He had cleared out the Ravagers, a gang that had been terrorizing the Baron's territory. The deal was simple. Work, pay. He had delivered. Now it was time for the Baron to fulfill his part of the bargain. "We had a deal, Baron," Jackson growled. "I cleared out your little Ravager problem. Now pay up." The Baron's laughter echoed, a cold, mocking sound that filled the grand chamber. "Oh, but I have something far more valuable than mere credits to offer you." With a wave of his hand, he gestured toward his guards. They vanished behind an ornate door. Jackson's patience was thinning, and his mind raced with calculations. His ship needed repairs, and those repairs wouldn't wait for whatever game the Baron was playing. "I don't have time for games, Baron," Jackson said, voice tight with urgency. "My ship needs repairs." But as the Baron gestured for the guards to return, Jackson's words caught in his throat. The guards reappeared, pushing a wooden cart between them. Jackson's eyes widened as they rolled it into the chamber. There, lying on the cart, was one of the most beautiful creatures he'd ever seen. Her skin was a pale, delicate green, her long, flowing hair the color of midnight shadows. She wore a revealing gown, the fabric pooling around her like liquid starlight. But it wasn't her appearance that stopped Jackson in his tracks. It was her eyes. Fierce, intelligent, and burning with barely contained rage, her gaze locked onto his with a power that seemed to pierce through him. "Meet my daughter, Thla," the Baron announced with a theatrical flourish, his voice dripping with malice. "She's been, shall we say, damaged goods. An unfortunate accident left her paralyzed from the waist down. Quite useless to me now, really, but perhaps you can find some value in her." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Jackson's stomach twisted. He stared at the princess, her defiant eyes not matching the weakness her father had implied. This wasn't just a daughter discarded. This was a person, someone with potential, someone who, despite her circumstances, had an undeniable strength about her. Jackson felt a mix of disgust and sympathy toward the Baron, but more than that, he felt intrigue. Something about Thela didn't sit right. She wasn't a pawn to be discarded. There was more to her than this cruel joke. Her voice cut through the air like a plasma blade. "Father, you cannot silence me." The Baron's lips curled into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He waved his hand dismissively. "The deal is done. Guards, help our human friend load his new acquisition onto his ship." Jackson's heart raced, but he couldn't let his anger show. He stared at the Baron, then at Thola, who was now being pushed roughly onto a hover stretcher. This was some kind of sick joke. He wasn't going to let her be sold off like this. He moved to protest, his hand instinctively reaching for his sidearm, but he quickly forced it back down. He knew he wasn't about to fight his way out of here. "You can't just give away your own daughter," Jackson protested, his voice barely above a growl. "I believe I just did," the Baron replied smoothly, a glimmer of amusement in his eyes. "Now, unless you'd prefer I have my guards escort you out without any compensation at all." He trailed off, his tone final. Jackson's hands tightened, but he knew better than to act rashly. He wasn't getting out of this easily. "Fine," he spat. "But this isn't over, Baron." As Jackson followed the guards carrying Thulla toward his ship, a strange sensation washed over him. Thulla's eyes never left his, her gaze intense, almost daring him to underestimate her. When they were far enough from the Baron's throne room, Thulla spoke, her voice low and dangerous. "If you think I'm going to be some helpless damsel for you to sell off to the highest bidder, you're gravely mistaken, human." Jackson turned to face her, surprised by the steel in her voice. He wasn't sure what to make of her, but he could see the fire beneath her outward appearance. "Right now, I'm just trying to figure out how to get off this rock without getting shot. We can discuss your future market value later." Thulla's eyes flickered with what might have been amusement. She smirked, a small, dangerous curve of her lips. But before Jackson could process it, they reached the ship. The stellar vagrant, Jackson's only way out of this mess. The guards roughly transferred Thulla into the cargo hold, and Jackson followed them. The tension in his chest grew tighter with each step. The ship's engines hummed to life, and as Jackson guided the ship out of the Baron's citadel, a voice broke the silence from behind him. "You're making a mistake if you think you can sell me," Thulla said, her voice dripping with aristocratic arrogance. "The black market traders you're considering? They're all in my father's pocket." Jackson kept his eyes on the controls, but he couldn't help the tightening in his jaw. "Please, spare me the grand speeches, Princess." Thulla scoffed. "I've seen that calculating look before, but I have something far more valuable to offer than whatever price you think I'll fetch." Jackson's gaze flickered to her, his curiosity piqued. "Let me guess, your eternal gratitude." "Information," Thulla said simply, her words hanging in the air between them. "About my father's illegal weapons trading, his deals with the Ravagers you just fought." Jackson's heart skipped a beat. This was bigger than just a simple transaction. This was about power, control, and survival. "Why would you betray your own father?" Jackson asked, his voice low, calculating. Thulla's bitter laugh echoed through the ship. "That man stopped being my father the day he decided a paralyzed daughter was worthless to his legacy. He's been trying to get rid of me for months, first through marriage arrangements with decrepit old nobles, then through increasingly tragic accidents. This is just the latest attempt." Jackson studied her closely. The woman in front of him was no helpless princess. She was a survivor, and now she was offering him something far more valuable than just credits. Her lips curled into a wry smile. "So now you have a choice. Help me access certain restricted medical facilities, and I'll give you everything I know about my father's operation. You want your credits? You'll need this information to buy your ship repairs. It's worth far more than just money." Jackson paused for a moment, weighing his options. A part of him still didn't trust her, but then again he was running out of options, and if she was telling the truth, "Fine," he said finally, his voice heavy with resolve. "Talk. But don't think I'm doing this out of the kindness of my heart." The stellar vagrant continued to hum through the void of space as Jackson plotted their course. He glanced at Thulla again, realizing that his life had just become exponentially more complicated. He wasn't just dealing with an alien noble anymore. He was dealing with a woman, a princess, who was about to change everything. As the stellar vagrant cut through the silent void of space, Jackson Reed couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just taken a sharp turn into unknown territory. He wasn't sure what to make of Thulla. The woman he had been handed as some sort of twisted joke was proving to be far more than just a princess. She was a force in her own right. The ship hummed softly as they sped through the black expanse of the galaxy. Jackson couldn't help but glance over at her every so often. She sat propped against the wall in the cargo hold, her elegant gown pooling around her like liquid starlight. Despite being paralyzed from the waist down, she still carried herself with the grace and dignity of royalty. Her eyes were sharp, her gaze always focused. She wasn't someone to be underestimated. She hadn't said much since their departure, but the silence between them was thick with the weight of unspoken words. Jackson knew she was angry. At her father, at the situation, and probably at him for being part of it all. But he also sensed something else beneath the surface, something that kept her fighting, despite everything she had endured. The ship's dim lighting bathed her skin in an otherworldly glow, and Jackson found himself lost in thought, wondering what had happened to her to make her father treat her this way. But before he could dwell on it further, she spoke, her voice breaking the silence with a quiet intensity. "You're making a mistake if you think you can sell me," she said, her tone cold, but with a hint of amusement. Jackson didn't respond immediately, his eyes still on the controls. Instead, he kept his focus, pretending not to notice the shift in the air between them. But he couldn't stop himself from glancing at her again. Her sharp eyes, that fire within them. It was undeniable. There was more to this woman than met the eye, and he could see it. Something about her made him want to believe her. "I'm not selling you," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "I'm not sure what your father expects to gain from all this, but I'm not in the business of trafficking people." Thula let out a soft laugh, bitter and laced with a touch of pain. "Your father's been trying to get rid of me for months, Jackson. First with marriage arrangements to decrepit old nobles, then by putting me in dangerous situations hoping for an accident. Now this." She glanced at him, a smirk on her lips. He thought he could throw me away like a piece of trash, but he forgot one thing. I'm not broken. Jackson studied her carefully. There was a quiet strength in her voice, a resilience that he couldn't ignore. For the first time, he started to realize that the Baron's cruelty had done something unexpected. It had forced Thula to become something far stronger than she had ever been meant to be. "You don't need to trust me, but you'll have to trust this," Thula continued. "You need credits for repairs, and I have something far more valuable than money. Information." Her eyes glimmered with intelligence, calculating, weighing her options, and Jackson knew she was offering him something big, the kind of information that could change the balance of power in the entire sector. Jackson's brow furrowed. "Information about what?" Thula's smile turned sharper, a glint of rebellion in her eyes. "About my father's operations, his illegal weapons dealings, his contracts with the Ravagers, and a few other secrets I'm sure you'd find interesting." He paused, letting her words sink in. His instincts told him there was more to this than just weapons and trade. There was something deeper, something that could explain the Baron's twisted behavior. "And what do you want in return?" Jackson asked, his voice low. He had to know what the cost was before he made any decisions. Her expression turned serious, her eyes cold as she looked up at him. "Help me access medical facilities, the kind that are off-limits. Experimental technology. It could give me back my ability to walk again. I'll give you the information you want, but you'll have to help me first." Jackson leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. He had to admit he wasn't sure what to make of all this. The idea of helping her, helping someone who had been discarded by her own father, felt like the right thing to do. But there were still too many unknowns. He couldn't just blindly trust her, could he? "Why should I help you?" he asked, his voice laced with suspicion. "You could be setting me up for a fall, and I'm not in the mood to be anyone's pawn." Thula's laughter was dry, almost mocking. "You think I'm setting you up? Do you really think my father would allow me to escape, let alone be a bargaining chip for a few credits? I'm worth far more than that." She leaned back against the wall, her gaze piercing. "You need those repairs, Jackson. I need that medical treatment. We both know we can help each other. So what's it going to be?" Jackson looked at her, watching her carefully. The fire in her eyes hadn't dimmed. But there was something else there now. A quiet desperation, mixed with a strange sense of hope. Maybe it was the way she carried herself, even in the face of everything her father had done to her. Or maybe it was the way she stood tall, despite the immense weight of her situation. For the first time, Jackson felt a flicker of respect for her. He didn't know what kind of game she was playing, but he could see that she wasn't just a helpless princess. She was dangerous, smart, and capable. "All right," he said, his voice steady. "We make a deal. You give me the information, and I'll help you get the treatment you want. But don't expect me to trust you completely, not yet." Thethla's lips curved into a smile that held more than a hint of triumph. "Deal. And don't worry, Jackson. You'll get more than you bargained for. Trust me." As the ship continued its journey through the vast expanse of space, Jackson couldn't help but wonder what he had just gotten himself into. He had thought this was going to be a simple job, a quick payday. But now, it was clear that Thela was anything but simple. She was a force in her own right, and her potential, her true potential, was something that no one could have foreseen. As the ship neared Station Nexus 9, the medical facility that might hold the key to Thela's recovery, Jackson's mind raced. The stakes were higher now than ever before. Not only did he have to protect Thela from the dangers of her past, but he also had to navigate the increasingly complex situation surrounding her father's criminal dealings. They arrived at Station Nexus 9, a massive structure of gleaming metal, and Jackson could already feel the tension building. He wasn't sure what they were about to walk into. But one thing was certain. Nothing was ever going to be the same. As they prepared to dock, Thela looked over at him, her eyes filled with both determination and something else, something deeper. "Get ready, Jackson. This is just the beginning." Jackson met her gaze, feeling a flicker of something inside him, an urge to protect her, to help her fulfill the potential he knew she had. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he did know one thing. He was in this for the long haul. The stellar vagrant coasted smoothly toward Station Nexus 9, the massive structure of gleaming metal growing larger with each passing moment. Jackson Reed's hands gripped the controls, but his mind was elsewhere. The deal he had struck with Thela was already changing everything he thought he knew about this job, about her, and about what he was willing to do. Jackson's eyes flicked over to Thela, who sat in the corner of the cargo hold. Her posture, graceful despite her condition, remained regal even in the confines of the ship. The closer they got to their destination, the more he realized the weight of the situation. They were no longer just dealing with a paralyzed princess. They were entangled in something far darker, deeper, and far more dangerous. Thela had been playing her own game from the beginning, and now Jackson was a part of it. "You seem quiet," Thela remarked, breaking the tense silence that had settled between them. "Is it because you're finally realizing that I'm not the helpless victim you thought I was?" Jackson glanced over at her, his jaw tightening. "I never thought you were helpless, but I'm starting to understand just how much I've underestimated you." She smiled, a quick flash of satisfaction that faded just as quickly. "Good, but don't get too comfortable. We both have a lot to lose." He didn't answer her immediately, instead focusing on the ship's navigation systems. But his thoughts were a whirl of calculation. The more he heard about her father, the more he realized that the Baron was a powerful player in this game, one who had too much to lose if Thala's secrets came to light. If the information she carried about her father's illegal dealings was true, it would put Jackson on the radar of far more dangerous people than the Baron. It wasn't just weapons trades or black market operations. It was about power, control, and legacy. "What's the deal with this medical facility?" Jackson asked, trying to steer the conversation back to the task at hand. "You said it could help you walk again. What exactly are we dealing with? Thethla turned her head, eyes narrowing. It's a place where experimental technology is developed. Mostly illegal. They do things most governments would never approve of. But there's something there. Something that could fix me. She hesitated for a moment, her fingers twitching against the fabric of her gown. Jackson saw her grip tighten, and he couldn't help but feel that she wasn't telling him everything. Something you're not telling me? Jackson asked, raising an eyebrow. Her eyes met his, and for a moment they seemed to soften. I didn't think you'd believe me, but the technology, it's not just about mobility. It could change everything, Jackson. It could change this way we understand what it means to be human, or alien. Jackson didn't know whether to be intrigued or concerned. The more Thethla spoke, the more complicated the situation became. And now it was clear. Helping her wasn't going to be as simple as getting some medical treatment. There were layers upon layers of danger, betrayal, and secrets. He was about to step into a world far beyond anything he had ever imagined. Before he could respond, the ship's proximity alarms sounded, pulling him back to the present. They were nearing Station Nexus 9. As Jackson guided the stellar vagrant into the docking bay, a message scrolled across the screen. Jackson's eyes narrowed as he read the words. An invitation from Lord Darius Krell, along with an offer of 5 million credits for the alien princess. Jackson's stomach dropped. Lord Krell, the very name made his blood run cold. Krell was notorious throughout the sector for his ruthless dealings, and now he was involved in this mess. Not only did he want Thethla, but it seemed he already knew exactly what kind of leverage she held. This doesn't feel right, Jackson muttered, his mind racing. He glanced at Thethla, who was staring at the message with an unreadable expression. Are you tempted, Jackson Reed? Thethla asked, her voice calm but laced with something darker, almost mocking. Jackson's hand tightened on the controls, but he didn't answer her right away. The idea of accepting Krell's offer seemed like an easy way out, but something about it didn't sit right with him. Thethla wasn't just some prize to be sold. And Krell was a snake, no matter how much money he was offering. I'm more concerned about how he knows about you, Jackson said, his voice low. How does Krell know what your father's been up to? Thethla's lips curled into a wry smile. Krell has spies everywhere, but what he doesn't know, what he never realized, is that I've already transmitted all of my father's data to secure locations. If anything happens to me, it goes public. All of it. Jackson stared at her, his mind reeling. She had already outsmarted Krell, had already prepared for the worst. Her father's empire of lies and illegal operations had already been set up to collapse, whether or not Jackson was involved. She wasn't just a pawn. She was the queen. So, you're not just offering me a deal for your own freedom, Jackson said slowly. You're offering me a chance to bring down your father's entire operation. Why? Because I don't need him anymore, Thethla replied, her voice surprisingly calm. He's been trying to discard me for months. He's been a dead weight on my future. I've learned to make my own way. And I've realized something. If I'm going to survive this, I need to take him down. And I'm going to use you to help me do it. Jackson looked at her, impressed despite himself. He had thought she was a victim, someone helpless and broken. But she was anything but. She was calculating, intelligent, and determined. In a way, she was more dangerous than anyone he had faced before. As the ship docked at Station Nexus 9, Jackson felt the tension build between them. But also something else. Something more powerful. A sense of purpose, of unity, was starting to form between them. This wasn't just a job anymore. This was a fight for something bigger. Jackson couldn't deny the growing attraction to Thethla, the way her presence seemed to fill the room. But this was no time for distraction. There was still too much at stake. Let's get this done, he said, his voice firm, determined. "We'll take Krell down, and your father's empire with him." Thyla's smile was sharp, almost predatory. "I knew you'd come around, Jackson." The stellar vagrant hummed steadily as it cruised through space, heading toward Station Nexus 9. Inside the ship, the air was thick with anticipation. Jackson Reed's hands gripped the controls tightly, but his mind was elsewhere. The closer they got to their destination, the more he realized that everything had changed. Thyla, the alien princess he had been forced to take, was no longer just a pawn in some twisted game. She was becoming something much more important to him than he could have ever predicted. Beside him, Thyla sat with quiet confidence, her eyes scanning the station schematics on the ship's holographic interface. She was still the royal princess, but there was something different about her now. There was strength in the way she carried herself, even in the face of everything she'd been through. The paralysis that had once been seen as a weakness was now just a minor detail in a much larger story, her story. Jackson couldn't stop thinking about how much he had underestimated her. Her father, Baron Theas, had treated her like a disposable object, but Jackson had begun to see her for what she truly was: dangerous, brilliant, and determined. The more she spoke about her plans to take down her father's criminal empire and bring Lord Krell to justice, the more Jackson realized how deep her resolve ran. "You sure about this?" Jackson asked as he adjusted their course. He had to ask, even though he already knew the answer. They were heading into the heart of the storm, and there was no turning back now. Thyla glanced up from the holographic interface, her eyes locking with his. There was no hesitation in her gaze. "I have no choice," she replied, her voice steady, almost cold. "This is my only chance. It's the only way I can stand on my own 2 feet again. After everything my father did, this is the only way I'll ever be free." Jackson nodded, understanding the weight of her words. This wasn't just about medical treatment anymore. This was about reclaiming her life, her freedom, and her identity. It was about proving to everyone, including her father, that she wasn't a burden. He let out a breath, his hand tightening on the controls as he pushed the ship closer to Nexus 9. "You've got more guts than I gave you credit for," he said, his voice low. She smiled, but it wasn't a soft smile. It was a smirk, a knowing look. "I'm used to being underestimated. Makes it all the more satisfying when I prove them wrong." As they approached the docking bay, Jackson could feel the weight of what was to come. They had no idea what they were walking into. Lord Krell, the criminal overlord with ties to her father, had put out a bounty for Thyla's capture. The thought of what Krell might do if he got his hands on her sent a chill through Jackson, but they couldn't afford to wait. "Remember the plan," Thyla said, her voice breaking through his thoughts. "I'll slip into the maintenance tunnels and get into the medical facility. You'll create a distraction. Once I reach the lab, I'll send the signal. You'll come in and get what I need." Jackson looked over at her, his brow furrowing. He could feel the tension between them rising, but he also felt something else. A strange sense of connection. They were about to risk everything, and it was more than just a job now. Thyla wasn't just the paralyzed princess he'd been forced to rescue. She was something more. And somehow, Jackson had become part of her fight. The ship docked smoothly in the bay, and Jackson felt the familiar rush of adrenaline. This was it, the moment they'd been working toward. He met Thyla's gaze one more time, searching her eyes for something, some sign that she wasn't as confident as she appeared. But there was nothing. She was all business now, and so was he. But just as they were about to disembark, the ship's comm system crackled to life. A message flashed across the screen. "An invitation from Lord Darius Krell, along with an offer of 5 million credits for the alien princess." Jackson's stomach dropped. The cold, mocking tone of Krell's voice echoed in the back of his mind. The invitation was clear. Krell had expected them, and now he wanted to make a deal. But Jackson wasn't fooled. Krell didn't make deals. He made traps. Thala read the message silently, her expression unreadable. Jackson watched her carefully, knowing that this would be their real test. Was she ready for this? "You're not surprised," Jackson said, more to himself than to her. She looked at him, her lips curling into a small, dangerous smile. "I told you. Krell's predictable. He thinks he controls everything, but he's wrong. This was always going to happen." "Yeah," Jackson muttered, his mind racing. "But why does it feel like we're walking right into his hands?" Thala's eyes softened, but only for a moment. Then she turned back to the comm system. "Because we are, Jackson. But Krell doesn't know me. He never did. And that's going to be his downfall." Jackson frowned, trying to keep his focus on the plan. "I hope you know what you're doing. We're not dealing with just any criminal. Krell's a monster." Thala's gaze locked onto his, and for the first time, Jackson saw the full extent of her resolve. She wasn't afraid. "I'm not afraid of him. He's been trying to break me for years, but he didn't count on me having a plan." She paused, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I didn't just come here to get treatment. I came here to take down my father's empire. And I'm going to use you to do it. You'll be the one who brings him down." Jackson's heart skipped a beat. He knew she wasn't just talking about the Baron anymore. She was talking about Krell, and anyone else who had been part of her father's twisted schemes. Thala was done playing the victim. She was taking control. Before he could respond, the ship's proximity alarms blared to life. They were running out of time. Lord Krell had mobilized his forces, and they were closing in. The tension between Jackson and Thala was thick. Neither of them could afford to second-guess their actions now. Thala stood up, her body moving with a grace that belied the paralysis that had once kept her bound. She was ready to fight, ready to end the life she had been forced to live. And Jackson, for the first time, realized that he wasn't just helping her escape. He was helping her lead a revolution. "Let's move," Thala said, her voice sharp. "We're doing this, and I'm going to show Krell exactly who I am." Jackson nodded. "Then let's go." As they stepped off the ship and into the heart of the station, Jackson felt the adrenaline hit him hard. There was no turning back now. He wasn't just a mercenary anymore. He was a partner in something far bigger than himself. They moved quickly, weaving through the station's labyrinthine hallways. Jackson kept his eyes on their surroundings, but it was Thala who seemed to know exactly where they were going. She led him through the shadows, her movements precise and deliberate. She wasn't just surviving. She was controlling the game. They reached the main access point to the medical facility, and Jackson could feel the tension building. But there was something else, something more between them now. It was more than just an alliance. There was an undeniable connection, one that had formed over the past days. Their bond was more than survival. It was strategic, emotional, and in some ways, irreversible. Thala looked at him, her eyes burning with the fire of someone who had been pushed too far. "I'm ready, Jackson," she whispered. "Are you?" He nodded, and as the doors to the medical facility slid open, he knew that this wasn't just about escaping Lord Krell. This was about changing everything. The galaxy had no idea what was coming, and neither did Krell. The stellar vagrant was now just moments away from Station Nexus 9, and Jackson Reed could feel the tension building in his chest. The mission had gone from a simple job to something far more complicated and dangerous. They weren't just looking for medical technology anymore. They were about to face Lord Krell, the notorious crime lord who had been pulling strings in the shadows. They were walking into a trap, but there was no turning back now. Thla, the alien princess who had once been cast aside as a burden, was now taking control of her fate in a way no one had ever expected. Jackson stole a glance at Tethla. She sat calmly in the cockpit, her eyes focused on the holographic interface as she scanned the layout of the station. Despite the danger they were about to face, she was calm. Too calm for someone who had once been treated like nothing more than an unwanted piece of property by her own father. Now, she wasn't just a princess. She was a force to be reckoned with. The paralysis that had once kept her tied down was now just a minor part of the equation. Her mind, sharp and calculating, had been her greatest strength all along. Thla turned to him, her eyes sharp, her voice steady. "We're close. Once we dock, I'll slip into the maintenance tunnels and get to the medical facility. You create the distraction and draw their attention. Once I reach the lab, I'll send you the signal. You come in, we get what I need, and then we get out. But you need to stay focused." Jackson nodded, his grip tightening on the controls. The plan was simple, but there were too many variables. The risk was high, and Lord Krell was not someone to be underestimated. But there was something in the air. Something about Thla that made him believe in her more than anyone else he had ever worked with. She wasn't just a survivor. She was someone who knew how to turn the odds in her favor. The ship docked smoothly in the bay, the hum of the engines dying down as Jackson ran a final check on the system. His thoughts were racing. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This wasn't about just getting paid and walking away. It was about changing everything. It was about freeing Thla from her father's grasp and showing the galaxy that sometimes the greatest strength comes from within, something neither her father nor Krell had ever seen in her. As the ship's doors opened, they moved quickly, slipping into the shadows of the station's corridors. The hum of the emergency lights echoed through the metal walls. They were ready. Jackson stayed close to Thla, his hand hovering near his sidearm as they moved deeper into the heart of the station. But as they approached the entrance to the medical facility, everything went still. The doors to the room slid open, and there, standing in the middle of the lab, was Lord Krell himself. "Well, well," Krell's voice was a low, mocking tone, full of dark amusement. "The princess graces us with her presence. I knew you'd come, but I didn't think you'd bring your human mercenary along for the ride." His eyes flicked to Jackson with disdain. Jackson's fingers tightened around the grip of his weapon, but Thla stepped forward without hesitation. There was no fear in her eyes, no doubt in her step. If anything, she looked more alive than ever. "You think you can control me, Krell," she said, her voice cutting through the air. "You think you can use me as some sort of pawn, but you're wrong. I'm here to end everything you've built." Her gaze hardened, her words steady and unflinching. Krell's lips twisted into a smile. "You're foolish, Thla. You think you can just walk in here and tear everything down? You have no idea what you're up against." "I know exactly what I'm up against," Thla replied, her voice calm, but with an underlying fury that Jackson could feel. "But what you don't know is that you underestimated me. You always have. And now I'm going to show you what happens when you make that mistake." Without warning, Thla pressed a few buttons on the console beside her, and the room was filled with the sound of explosions in the distance. Krell's men dropped like flies as the blast shook the station's walls. Jackson could hear the chaos erupting all around them. Thla didn't flinch. She was already on the move, heading for the access point to the main lab. "Move!" she shouted, and Jackson followed her, instinctively reaching for his weapon as Krell's men scrambled to recover from the surprise. There was no time to think now, only to act. As Jackson and Thela moved deeper into the lab, it became clear just how much Thala had planned. She wasn't just here for medical technology. She was here to take control. Thethela's neural enhancement was firing on all cylinders, and Jackson could feel it in the air around them. She wasn't just accessing systems. She was taking over them. "Jackson," she said suddenly, her voice crackling with power. "This isn't just about walking again. It's about breaking free from everything they've done to me, to us. You have to see this." Jackson glanced at her, seeing the familiar glow in her eyes, and for a moment it wasn't just about the mission. It was about the revolution she had started. A revolution that had already begun with her father's empire, and now Krell. She wasn't just a pawn in this game. She was the queen. She pressed a few more buttons on the console, and with a sudden flash, data began to flood the systems. Thela had what she needed. The information she had been gathering was unstoppable, and the facility's systems were now under her control. She was using the technology to broadcast Krell's crimes, exposing his operation to the world in real time. Krell's voice crackled over the comms, full of rage. "You think you've won, Thala? You think you can just walk away from all of this? You're nothing. You've always been nothing." Thela didn't flinch. She walked toward the console, her face hardening with every word he spoke. "I'm not your burden anymore, Krell. I'm what happens when you push too far, when you try to hold back someone with more power than you ever realized." The facility was shaking as alarms blared, signaling Krell's last-ditch effort to stop them. Jackson could feel the intensity rise, the urgency to get out before the situation escalated. But Thela wasn't done yet. She wasn't just taking control of the systems, she was rewriting the rules. The data streamed in, proof of Krell's illegal weapons deals and his secret alliance with her father, and it was all going public. The empire she had been born into was about to crumble. "We need to go," Jackson said, his voice tense. But Thela wasn't listening. She was still connected to the systems, still absorbing the full power of her neural enhancement. The bond between them was palpable, an unspoken understanding that they were about to change everything together. Before Jackson could say anything else, the doors to the facility exploded inward, and a dozen of Krell's men poured in, guns raised. It was the moment they had been waiting for, the final confrontation. Thela turned to him, her eyes glowing with power. "Stay close," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "We finish this now." As the battle raged around them, Jackson realized that this wasn't just about survival. It was about a rebirth. For Thela, for the galaxy, and for him. Together, they would tear down the old system and build something new, something better. The sounds of the explosion echoed through the facility as the last of Krell's men fell to the floor, incapacitated by the chaotic surprise. But Jackson, Reed, and Thela were far from safe. The moment they had prepared for was now unfolding in front of them. The final battle. The stellar vagrant was just moments away from taking flight, and yet everything felt like it was happening in slow motion. Krell's forces were still reeling from the shock of Thethela's sudden takeover. Lord Krell, too, was desperate, furious at the turn of events. He had underestimated Thela, thinking her a broken daughter to be discarded, but she had become something more than he could have ever imagined. And now, the weight of his empire was beginning to crumble under the pressure of the very person he had tried to erase. "Jackson, we need to move." Thela's voice broke through the tension, calm but firm. "We have what we came for. We expose him now, and everything changes." Jackson didn't hesitate. He could see the raw determination in her eyes, the way the power of her neural enhancement hummed in the air, amplifying everything she felt. Her abilities were beyond anything he had ever seen. She wasn't just a princess. She was a force, a living testament to the strength of will. "Lead the way," he said, his voice low but resolute. He would follow her, to the end. Thala turned toward the central control panel, her fingers dancing over the interface. The systems responded immediately, but it wasn't just the facility she was controlling. It was Krell's entire operation, all his illegal dealings, all the dirty deals he had brokered in the shadows. She had it all. And now she was going to take it all down. The screen flashed to life, and the data began streaming in, broadcasted across the galaxy for everyone to see. Proof of Krell's criminal operations, the weapons deals, the alliance with her father, the entire foundation on which Krell had built his power. This wasn't just a victory for Thala. It was a victory for every species Krell had used and discarded. The truth was finally going to be exposed. As the holographic projections shifted on the walls, Thala turned to Jackson, her eyes filled with something both fierce and serene. "This is it," she whispered. "This is where it all changes." Jackson could see the fire in her eyes. She wasn't just getting revenge on her father, or Krell, or anyone else who had wronged her. She was changing the future. She was using her pain, her struggle, and her resilience to build a better galaxy, one where no one would be cast aside again. But they weren't out of danger yet. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the hallways. Krell's remaining forces had regrouped, and they were closing in fast. Jackson felt his pulse quicken, but Thala remained calm. She didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. She was in control, and Jackson trusted her implicitly. "We move now," Thala said, her voice calm, yet filled with purpose. "We finish this?" As they moved through the facility, making their way toward the exit, Krell's forces descended upon them, guns raised and ready to fire. But Jackson didn't flinch. He had Thala by his side, and together they were more than capable of taking down any threat that came their way. Thala's enhanced abilities were now fully activated. As they turned a corner, Krell's men opened fire, but time seemed to slow as Thala's eyes flashed with determination. Her enhanced nervous system processed every movement, every gunshot, before it even happened. With a fluid motion, she lifted her hands, and the weapons of Krell's men suddenly malfunctioned, the guns turning to scrap metal in their hands. Jackson couldn't help but marvel at the sight. Thala had become something extraordinary, not just in terms of her abilities, but in the way she had taken control of everything. She wasn't just fighting for her freedom anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been oppressed or cast aside. Her actions now weren't just about revenge. They were about empowering others. Krell, standing at the far end of the hallway, shouted in frustration. "You can't do this. You think you've won. You think this is your victory? I will never let you destroy everything I've built." Thala's voice was unwavering as she replied. "You built this empire on lies, Krell, and now it's crumbling. You were never in control. You just didn't realize it until now." Without another word, she stepped forward, her neural enhancement sending a wave of energy across the room. Krell's eyes widened in shock as his own systems began to fail. His control, his empire, everything he had once held tightly, was now slipping through his fingers. Thala took another step, and with a final movement, she shut down Krell's entire network. His empire fell, his forces, his weapons, his influence, all of it disappeared with the flick of her hand. The power had shifted. The station fell silent, the hum of the emergency alarm still echoing in the distance. Krell's forces had been disabled, and Thala stood victorious. She had done it. She had defeated her father's empire and brought Krell to his knees. But as Jackson stood beside her, watching the once proud crime lord now crumpled and broken, he realized that this was only the beginning. Thala wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was a leader, and she had just proven that nothing, Not even an empire built on lies could hold her back. "I did it," Thla said softly, almost to herself. But Jackson could hear the weight of her words. She wasn't just talking about this battle. She was talking about everything she had fought for, everything she had lost and gained. Jackson stepped closer to her, feeling the warmth of her presence. "You didn't just do it, Tuthla. You changed everything. You showed the galaxy what happens when you don't give up, when you don't let anyone define you." She looked up at him, and for the first time since he had met her, he saw a smile, genuine, unburdened. "I couldn't have done it without you, Jackson. You saw me. Not the princess, not the burden. You saw my potential, and that's everything." Jackson smiled, his heart swelling with something he hadn't expected. He hadn't just helped her escape her past, he had helped her forge a future, and that future wasn't just hers to shape. It was the galaxy's. The station's windows lit up, the view of the stars beckoning them toward a new horizon. Krell's empire was gone. Her father's influence was a thing of the past, and together they were about to build something new. Thla stepped forward, taking his hand. "There's still much to do," she said, her voice full of conviction. "But for the first time, I feel like I'm free. Not just from them, but from all the chains I've ever carried." When Jackson nodded, his grip firm around hers. "We're not just free, Thla. We're about to change everything."